So check this out. I've got a number of stories about flock cameras here. And you'll see, here's this. It never ends. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution, more Georgia officers arrested for flock camera misuse. And David Knight covered one of those types of stories where a man had been in a police security detail on a movie, saw an attractive woman who was an extra, got her license plate, and hunted her down on the roads in Florida, because that's super classy. Of course, people in Houston are fighting back. Someone's chopping down flock cameras left and right. And we have some footage to show you about that in just a minute. Officers in Auburn and California are panicking after a mysterious group of people stole the majority of their flock cameras. And this, yes, there's something extra, the cousin of the flock camera. The last thing free people want is AI on garbage trucks, taking video of your property, identifying if you've got a broken window or if you've left construction debris for pickup, and then coming after you with fines and to make sure you have a permit for what you do. So the Fourth Amendment be damned, evidently, for these people. But let me show you this one, this man in Minnesota, and then we'll bring in Eric Peters. Now, why is that? This is a man in Minnesota who was pulled over and surrounded by police because a flock camera had said his vehicle was stolen. You know what this man does for a living? He test drives cars, which is something Eric Peters does. Yes, that's right.
Yes. Okay, is this your car?
It's complicated. Can I explain it?
You can explain it, yes.
I review cars for a living. I fly around the world and review cars. I have a different car every single week.
The reason you have 4 cops here is because your license plate is registered as stolen license plates in our system.
Are you serious?
That's why Flock has been reading it, because it's popping up as a stolen plate. Okay.
Got it. So this was picked up somewhere by Flock. Cameras that read my license plate now twice in the last couple of days, and it picked up and flagged it for the cops. You guys have been searching for this car. Unreal.
So here's the guy that got pulled over. He's absolutely shell-shocked that his plate was identified as stolen by these flock cameras. And just imagine if the police had swarmed him and there was some kind of altercation and like he died because of an interaction, because of a misidentified flock camera. So let's just see what the average American has to say about this. This is the comment section. Flock violates the Constitution, which it absolutely does. You have a right to travel and not be stopped and searched if you've done nothing wrong. How is this not a violation of the Fourth Amendment? Of course, it's a flock camera, pretty much equivalent to a law enforcement trusting AI to do the work for them. This is exactly what's going on because these do use AI. We are losing our rights, ban flock. All right, so everyone agrees that this is wrong. Nobody wants to be tracked. These people do not have a warrant to be tracking you like this. This should be illegal.
And that principle applies to the police on the roads. This is the thing that opens the door to this sort of thing, because people accept the idea that the government can run the roads and therefore somehow they can push away and have a rights-free zone because they couldn't operate otherwise. Let's get our guest, Eric Peters, to give us his thoughts and a lot more thoughts, everybody. It's time for our Vulcan Mind Meld, my friends, on Liberty Conspiracy. If you've got comments or anything you want to add, feel free to drop your comments on X or inside Rumble. And let's hear from Eric.
I must try to mind meld with it.
Infinity ends.
Our minds are merging, Doctor. Our minds are one. I feel what you feel. I know what you know.
All right. Thank you, Spock. You guys rock. They are very cool. I'd like to have like a binge session. Look, hey, there's something you can binge right there. The Eric Peters Autos website. And now adding us to the stage together, the technological breakthroughs of the Russians. Bring on our guest, Live long and prosper, my friend. How are you? How's it going, Eric?
Well, let's start with the Star Trek references. One. Hey, by the way, the other reference that came to mind, you remember the old episode Mirror, Mirror?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. With Spock's beard and everything.
Remember how Spock, I think it was Spock, had that, no, it was Kirk. Evil Kirk had that tool in his quarters where he could see what everybody was doing.
That's right.
And then he could vaporize them.
Yeah, he could kill anybody.
Years ago, they predicted what these flock cameras would do to us.
It's like, that's so true. It's like he had some sort of a drone thing going on. One of the things that I wanted to do when they started Star Trek Enterprise was I wanted to pitch them the idea of, the whole concept of Enterprise was, it was the very early days of the Federation, just after they had first contact with the Vulcans. And so in the very first episode, they actually introduced teleportation and things like that. They had just gotten warp drive. And I thought, oh, what a great way to show the risks and dangers of space travel, where in the first episode, they make some error where it's almost like an Apollo 13 thing, where just a fraction of some miscalculation sends them so far away, and their energy is gonna be screwed up that they have to work out a way to get back. And then over the course of like 3 or 4 episodes back on Earth, have it that people inside the Federation and inside politics are dying, and they tend to be the ones who support unifying and working with the Vulcans. And then I wanted to have it that there's some faction of the Vulcans that think that communicating with the humans is extremely dangerous because the humans are very emotional. And so the only logical thing to do is to exterminate the humans. And so they're beaming using teleportation. And at this time, the humans don't have any teleportation technology. They're just finding these bodies. And what they're finding is, what somebody realizes is that they discovered that there's this like an energy anomaly every time these people end up having these brain seizures. And I might have mentioned this to you before, somebody's teleporting air bubbles into people's brains, just causing aneurysms and basically blowing up their brains inside their heads using teleportation. I thought that would be a great thing. And then they backtrack and they realize, what is this technology? And then they discover what the teleportation actually is. I thought that would be a great series of stories,
Yeah, very cool. I was Enterprise was one of the better franchise spinoffs from post Next Generation.
Yeah, I thought they did a great. It improved. It definitely improved too, because the first few episodes weren't so good, I thought, and then towards the end they really ramped it up. It was a good series after that. I haven't watched in a long time, unfortunately, so I don't know what any of. I mean, they even have like another dumb cartoon or something like Lower Deck.
It's become really bad. Yeah. I thought Picard was terrible. I almost cried after I finished watching Picard. It was that bad.
It's so sad. But anyway, hey, listen, Eric, I know that you were in the back room when I was playing that video, so I don't know whether you got to see that video, but I mentioned it to you that I saw this story about this guy who test drives these cars.
I did catch that. Very interesting. I don't know that guy, but yeah, I'm in exactly the same position. Each week I get a new vehicle to drive, and they have interesting plates. Typically they're a weird combination of letters and digits, and they have manufacturer on them because the vehicles are owned by Ford, GM, whoever the car company is. Mm-hmm. And a couple of times, when I've been pulled over for a traffic infraction, I have to go through the explanatory process of, hey, I'm a car journalist, and the car's not stolen. Here's all the paperwork that goes with it. And most cops have never dealt with a car journalist before, so it sounds a little sketchy.
Yeah.
At first, but yeah, I mean, I feel for this guy. This, all of us. This idea that when we're outside of our homes, we're constantly being recorded and monitored and treated as presumptively criminal. You think about it as where does that happen? It happens in prison. Prisoners are under constant surveillance, but the key difference is that they've been convicted of a crime, and they're in prison for that reason. Whereas we are treated as presumptively criminal, even though we have committed no crime. And that's what happened to this guy. He didn't do anything, and he finds himself surrounded by the hut crew. And this is so true. Story that I wrote about the other day, which you mentioned about the Waymo car in California, where a couple of teenagers, are out doing the kind of stupid thing the things that we did when we were teenagers, 15-year-old kids apparently, and They got this Waymo and they got some booze and they had some water pistols, and they were, just kind of going around squirting people with the water pistols, harmless, stupid teenager stuff. Anyway, the Waymo car has cameras in it, and the cameras were watching these kids, and it determined that what they were doing was illegal. It triggered the car, and then the car brought them to the cops. Basically, it went into a parking lot and shut itself down. And I don't know, I wasn't able to find out whether it locked them in the car, but it did call the cops. It parked itself, and before you know it, the hut crew arrives. 5 cops surround these teenagers. Body armor on, high-powered weaponry and all of that. But the thing is, this is something that is going to happen to us, and in a way, it is already happening to us.
Yeah,
I keep trying to beat the drum and let people know that pretty much every current year vehicle, and a lot of vehicles that are a few years old, already have cameras in them that are watching you,
right,
and they're capable of sending your image to and a third party somewhere. They have microphones in them. You have Alexa or Google Assistant. That means you've got a microphone in your car, and Alexa and Google are connected to what? Somebody has the capacity to find out what you are saying, what you're talking about in your car. And you can see all these little pieces of the puzzle that are sort of coming together, where we're going to get to a point where, the car is effectively a kind of mobile prison. It's like a transport vehicle that takes you from place to place, kind of like the way a prisoner is taken from one clink to another clink.
Yeah. And I was thinking about it as I was driving over here to Mason about our conversation, and I thought, that it's the Panopticon is modular. They're bringing in new sections of it that operate on their own, but also form the larger zeitgeist Panopticon. And Jeremy Bentham would be proud, I think.
Yeah, and that's the key, I think, to the success of this operation. It wasn't as if they threw a switch, and yesterday we had normal cars that were under our control. And then tomorrow, all of a sudden, the only cars you can get are cars that are connected and that have the ability to control you, monitor you, record you. It's been done incrementally, piece by piece. It's a slow walk.
Yeah.
I actually got an article on deck. It's not published yet, but I was prompted to write it based on an experience that I had the other day while test driving a brand new Honda Pilot. So I'm driving down the road in this Pilot, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, for no discernible reason, in the dashboard erupts this gigantic rectangular warning that says "brake, brake, brake," all capital letters, with an exclamation point. Now,
that's not good.
What is that? That's the Automated Emergency Braking System. AEB is the acronym. A lot of cars already have this, and come 2029, I believe it is, by federal requirement, all cars will have to have this system. It takes away the agency that you had to control when you decide to brake. Now the car brakes, and it will brake. I've had this happen now multiple times for no particular reason, not because somebody pulled out in front of me, a kid ran in the road. It just glitches because, again, these systems are technological. They're not biological. They're based on cameras and LiDAR and radar sensors. And sometimes they don't understand that, you're going around a curve and there's a berm, on the road as you're going around, and it sees that berm and it thinks that that's something that's in the road.
An animal, a person, a child.
Sure. Something like that. Or just randomly glitches. I had this happen in a Toyota about 2 years ago. I was driving down the road in a Toyota, and I was the only car on the road. And the car stopped in the middle of the road. It just slammed on the brakes and stopped. And if there had been a tractor trailer, 70,000-pound tractor trailer coming behind me, because, again, people will say, oh, well, if they're not following too closely, there'll be no problem. The problem is that you don't anticipate that. So there's this, you're going to be less on your guard when you're driving in a situation where there's no reason for that car ahead of you to slow down or brake. So if it suddenly slams on the brakes, there's going to be that moment, for your brain to register and to react. And so this is the way it's going to go.
Yep.
They're going to say, well, the AEB system, it doesn't have that flaw. The AEB system would automatically brake. And then they'll say, well, the problem then is the cars that don't have AEB and all of these other systems. I don't think they're going to try to directly outlaw them. What I think that they're probably going to do is use the insurance mafia, which is, ex officio an adjunct of the government at this point.
In many states, they're
One of many.
dependent on the government. They're such rent seekers. Of course, you've got to get auto insurance. Luckily, in New Hampshire, we're not like that. But Massachusetts, they force everybody. You got to have auto insurance. So the auto companies will play the game with the government easily. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and what will happen is that the insurance companies will say, the mafias will say, well, if your car doesn't have AEB, it doesn't have all of this automated safety technology, then it presents a greater risk. And so we're going to charge you accordingly based on that risk, and it's going to be exorbitant. So they'll use that tool, I predict, to push cars that don't have all this technology out of circulation and off the road. Because after all, let's say, the cost is $4,000 a year, in insurance. Most people can't pay that.
No.
So, they'll just get rid of their car, and they'll just get, I guess, into a monthly payment for a car that has the AEB. This is not to be considered in isolation. You have to see the pattern. This is something that's been happening for 50 years now. Now the pace is picking up because we're getting to that event horizon where it all sort of just comes together. But you can see it. It's very obvious now what the intention and what the goal has always been.
And, you're reminding me, Eric, of a conversation I had with my old family doctor, Jan Tigelaar, who came over. He left the Netherlands in World War II. He was actually an Olympic level sculler. I could have gone into crew and sculling. Came to the United States, became a family doctor, and he got out of the practice and retired because he could see where it was coming, towards the ever larger regulatory state, the insurance companies playing with the federal government, the bureaucratic nonsense, and the higher expenses for him with paperwork and so on, the coding and all these things, the invasion of privacy, because by that time they had already passed the HIPAA thing, which, as I've mentioned here on the show, within pages 75 to 95, gives the federal government the power to check in on people's health records. And nobody even talks about it. And you're saying what you just said echoes, because you know the profession and you know this line. It echoes what the Dr. Tigelaar said. Same thing with F. Paul Wilson. He said that he could see this coming a mile away. He was a medical doctor and he knew where it was going, so he would write stories about it. And also, I would like to dispel some notions, or this is actually a good opportunity, I think, Eric, to dispel some misapprehensions that people have, because I can see within the debate of, what's the answer? How did they get out of this? There are different levels of people trying to address this. Some people will correctly bring up the Fourth Amendment and say flock cameras are wrong. Then your side of the technology with these actual connected to the internet and AI control systems inside the cars that are basically run by algorithms that conform to what the politicians want because they run the roads. And the insurance companies will back this up with economic penalties to make sure that you comply with your vehicle. And if you can't afford it, you're not going to be driving. And one of the things that they say is they might say, well, see, this is what you get when you allow businesses to run everything. And what I try to explain to people is, no, this is corporatism. This is fascism, and it's being driven by political ideology. It's being driven by a discarding of your rights. And so, for example, you in your article, you had a picture of Johnny Cab from what was that? The Arnold Schwarzenegger movie.
Or no, it was I can't remember. Gosh, I'm losing track of my dystopian movies. I can't remember which one it was from.
Yeah, wasn't the running? Was it the Philip K? It was based on a Philip K. Dick one, I think. I'm not sure. But anyway,
Total Recall.
Total Recall. Yeah, Total Recall. The one where he goes to Mars and stuff, right? Yeah, and so Johnny Cab's a perfect example. And so I'll just to play this out. When my friend Bobby and I were working on our story about a private city, basically, a private, very large county in the future, that this guy basically works with the American Indians because the United States is basically bankrupt, and they're able to buy a sovereign spot, and they make it completely voluntary. It's a voluntarist enclave. And virtually everything is done through voluntary contract. People are accepted there if they have a sponsor or if they've shown that they're safe enough and they can invest and they can indemnify themselves in a certain way that if they do something wrong. So this guy becomes a police officer there, and they have automated cars. So what I explain to people is, look, the difference between what we were coming up with and what we're seeing with the United States government and states and cities and insurance companies and auto companies is the dystopia that people think will come about if private companies are allowed to do whatever they want already shows us that it will be negated by the fact that people will describe it as a dystopia. They won't want to go there. And if they have a choice, they won't. So the difference is choice. If a company that is on its own and has to rely on people who want to go there and have a good time, if it's not giving people a good time, they're not going to go there, which is what's been happening with Disney World and a lot of different places. They don't like it. Even just the sentimental side of Disney World, right? They're like, no, I'm not going to give them my money, right? So the difference is they can't force people to pay for them, right? A private city where people will have automated cars, if the automated cars are invading their privacy or they're taking them to places where they don't want to go, who would want to go there? They'll go someplace that operates better, right? It's like, duh, it's just simple. It's just simple human nature. But when the government is there, they can set these things up and all the rent seekers can say, yeah, we can bleed off of this. Insurance companies will make sure that the legislation is passed, that auto drivers have to have insurance in the states. And now the legislation is backing up the auto company. It's the state that is the gun. That's what forces everybody. So I think that's an important thing. Just like we can see satisfaction for consumers or dissatisfaction for consumers drives people to or from something, it's the same thing with this. If there were an automated city that were operating beautifully, people would like it. And if it doesn't operate beautifully, that experiment fails, something else pops up. But government locks it in because it has completely contrary incentives.
Yeah, this is, I think, fundamentally a problem of etymology and of definitions. We hear talk about private companies like Flock, but really they're not.
Right.
They're de facto government entities. What's happened is that certain interests have figured out that the government is hobbled in certain ways. Even today, there are things the government can't legally do because of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and things like that, or at least make it more difficult for the government to do certain things. These so-called private companies, on the other hand, aren't hobbled in that way. So the private company starts erecting these flock cameras, and then they turn the data over to the government.
Right.
So, essentially what we have is what you said, corporatism, and it's this fallacious idea that we're dealing with private property. We're not. We're dealing with essentially one thing that has two aspects. Corporatism is government, and this so-called nominally legally private corporate stuff, but it's effectively the government. It's the same thing. They use each other to extract money in the first place and to exert control. The insurance thing is a perfect example. Insurance in principle is not immoral. The idea of hey, I'm concerned that a big tree might fall on my house. It's a slight risk. It's probably not going to happen, but for my peace of mind, it's worth it to pay a relatively small sum of money every year so that in the event that a tree does fall on my house, I know that I'll have a crew come out here and fix it, and I won't have to come up with a large sum of money to pay for the repair. It becomes a problem when it's coercive, when they say you have to have it, because then you have to pay. You have to pay what they say too.
Right.
And the insurance company no longer has an incentive to keep costs down. It in fact has incentive to keep costs up,
right,
to the nth degree as much as possible, and it thoroughly corrupts everything. That's the problem that we have right now with regard to all these things. Yeah,
it's so true. It's so true, and it goes to the heart of government. We have to pay for it, so obviously the costs are not going to go down. And I was thinking I was watching a scene from Lord of the Rings, and the temptation to seize that power and the panopticon approach of the Palantiri being able to see everybody. And it is very interesting how people through the generations have worried about this sort of thing, and whether they, had foresight or their worries were common and they expressed it in a very, very good way. We're definitely reaching this point now where this dystopian panopticon is coming at us with great power. And the other thing I wanted to touch on, Eric, is, within the NDAA, we have this Section 219, which was the 244, and then within the Senate, with the Senate Intelligence Authorization Act, which is, obviously just as obnoxious. They have this, and Tim Scott is behind that one over in the Senate. They have this way now that they're going to try to integrate the Israeli corporate firms and Israeli intelligence firms. And I've seen a couple of people talk about it, and I know that I've been singing this note a lot, but I think it's important to bring up because it shows the way that this system manifests and perpetuates itself, just like the military bases in the States, when they would have the base closure sessions over the past 30 years or so, it was virtually impossible to get the bases in the various states closed, even though they weren't necessary, because people worked there. And the local politicians said, no, you're eliminating jobs. And I think this is what the Israelis really want, and the Zionist supporting politicians want. They want these corporate connections planted in these states so that the state politicians embrace the corporatization of Israel as part of this corporate political nexus.
Well, sure. There's no provision in the NDAA for a partnership with Switzerland, is there? And the reason for that is that, Boeing, Raytheon, all these companies don't get massive contracts to provide weapons to the Swiss. Right?
Yeah.
So, right. This is ultimately, at the end of the day, it's primarily about money, and it's also about control. It's extraordinarily cynical. And then it's presented in a way, and I think this is what irks a lot of people who see it. It's cloaked with this sort of messianic, we must support Israel because the Bible tells us to, kind of a thing. That was an ingenious move. To cast all of this in terms of something that is extraordinarily useful in manipulating the Christians of the West, and getting them to go along with it because, hey, we've got to do this. After all, it says in the Bible that you have to, support Israel. That's what they say. Of course, right. It does, the interpretation of that is, Chuck Baldwin has a lot to say about that, and so do a lot of other people. But nonetheless, it's been remarkably effective. No other state enjoys that sort of religious privilege. This isn't just realpolitik. This is all about, your faith and God and what's important.
Yeah. And I think obviously Netanyahu and many of the others out there, and Trump as well, and J.D. Vance and many on the Trump team, they're sensitive to the fact that Americans are recognizing the genocide and the slaughter in Gaza, the attempts to basically duplicate that in southern Lebanon, the takeover of the West Bank, the attacks on Jerusalem, all these different types of things. They're saying, the sentiment isn't there. So what we need to do is we need to get hidden underneath that like parasites within the foundations of the U.S. corporate military nexus inside the states. And I mentioned this story. I don't think you were in the back room on that one, Eric, but there's this story about Qatar and Volkswagen, which I think is quite interesting because Qatar has been supporting the United States on its attempts to attack Iran. And of course, the United States is attacking Iran mostly because of Israel. But I thought it was interesting because Qatar is canceling some of its contracts with Volkswagen. And you have a piece on Volkswagen, the Fahrvergnügen piece. Yeah. If we can touch on that, I'd like to show that on the screen. This another excellent piece from yesterday. Yeah, it was the 9th. Kick a little asphalt, the commercial said. The waning of Fahrvergnügen. And even when they put out the Fahrvergnügen, people were like, what does that mean? We are driven. What is this? I don't understand. But they had some little get up and go stuff. Tell us about this article about the VW GTI.
What the word Fahrvergnügen means, it doesn't literally translate, but it essentially means the joy of driving, the enjoyment of getting in a car and having some fun in a car. And they actually had a really effective marketing campaign years ago talking about how their cars were fun to drive. You know, they would do things like produce a Germanic version of the Ronnie and the Daytona's little GTO.
Yeah. Yep. I remember it was in German. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, it was great. It was fun.
Planet GT. Oh, da, 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 da. Right. Yep.
Volkswagen used to be like this really cool company that made German cars, which normally are expensive, you know, Mercedes and BMW and Audi. But here's a car that regular Americans can buy that's a lot of fun to drive and yet has those, you know, higher build quality standards that used to be characteristic of German cars. Really, really effective, you know, and they sold a bunch of cars on that basis. Well, you know, fast forward to about 10 years ago, and they were selling these wonderful TDI diesel powered cars that got 50 something miles per gallon, that would go 700 miles on a tank of fuel, that would last for 300,000 miles, being diesels. And again, Fahrvergnügen, fun to drive, inexpensive, affordable, sensible cars. And that's exactly why they got attacked, you know, for cheating, as they framed it, on the government's emission certification test. And we're talking about picayune, pedantic, trivial differences in a particular emission, oxides of nitrogen, that they had to use elaborate machinery to identify. It wasn't something that could be picked up by the federal emissions test cycle or by the state emissions, you know, inspections where you go and they put the tailpipe sniffer in your car. Those tests didn't detect it. The only way to detect it was to hook it up to these extremely sensitive machines. And they figured out that under wide open throttle, under certain conditions, the Volkswagen software allowed the engine to emit fractionally more NOx emissions. No meaningful harm was ever produced, but, you know, they framed it as if VW were producing these soot spewing things that were causing asthmatics to wheeze and die. You know, it was just an incredibly vicious campaign. And my thesis has always been, because of the timing, that it was done because those cars represented a real threat to the then just beginning push to get everybody into the electric vehicle thing.
That's my thoughts exactly when they came out with, what was it, a $16 billion fine at that time?
No, it was like more than 30 billion. And
that's what it was. Yeah. And you could see that's exactly why they were doing it, because they knew that was an alternative, great mileage, and it would have made the calls for the electric vehicle within their climate change cult completely useless.
Yeah. Now, there's another aspect to this that most people don't know about, and I like to bring this up whenever I have the opportunity, because I think it's important, and I think it really makes the point about this thesis that you and I have. Volkswagen was at that time developing a diesel hybrid commuter that was going to get 100 to 150 miles per gallon.
Wow.
And that would have been catastrophic for the EV push, because even though it still burns fuel, it burns so little fuel that the so-called emissions argument becomes a non sequitur, especially relative to when you take into account all of the emissions that are created and all the earth rape that attends producing a single electric vehicle and its battery pack and all of the stuff that goes along with it. So long story short, you know, Volkswagen got raked over the coals. You know, they learned to love Big Brother. Remember the scene, you know, after Winston is finally tortured to the point where he just surrenders, and he loves Big Brother. So Volkswagen dropped entirely all their TDI powered cars, and they just went all in on this EV boondoggle, and they're still doing it. And this article talks about they're taking the GTI, the beloved GTI that has historically been one of the most fun, enjoyable little cars to drive, and turning it into an electric vehicle. An expensive electric vehicle, a $45,000 battery-powered vehicle that has a range of 263 miles. And again, you know, I think people might be interested in that, but you know, it's not much fun, because it's just like every other battery-powered device. You know, no transmission to shift. You just sit there, push the pedal, yay, whippy. Goes 263 miles before you have to stop and sit around at a charger somewhere, you know, for a half hour before you can get out on the road. It's batty. They continue to, you know, to try just to push that square peg in the round hole.
And you know, the thing about it too is that you know, maybe generations will change, but you point out in the article that there's no throttle on this thing. So the Volkswagen people tried to simulate the sound, and it's so childish and stupid. The whole thing is so dumb. It's like,
well, isn't it
obvious?
Yeah. I mean, it's a confession.
Yeah, exactly. I
heard to them. And, you know, Dodge did the same thing when they came out with the battery powered charger in 2024. They included fake engine sounds.
Yeah.
And Mercedes, one of their so-called supercar electric cars, has fake shift feel and fake shift sounds. Well, okay, if you're having to do that, doesn't that suggest that you are conceding that the so-called old thing was actually more desirable?
Exactly. There's something about it that people like.
Imagine buying like a gas engine car in the 50s, and it had a tape recorder that played horse sounds.
It's like Monty Python with the coconuts going behind them.
It's silly and it's sad at the same time that they do that. They can't even own it. They can't even just, okay, this is an electric car. We embrace, as they love to say that, love that word, embrace.
I know.
Well, let's do that then. The problem is they know that the real dilemma, not leaving aside the charge and the waiting and all that, is they're all the same. I've driven so many of them, and ultimately they are all the same. Yeah, some of them have a bigger battery. Some of them get to 60 quicker than the others, but they have the same non-existent personality. Do escalators have personalities? Some escalators are faster than other escalators.
It's really incredible. I keep thinking, I remember I had a dream one time where all I had was a motorcycle, like an old time, cross country motorcycle. And I had to get along on that. And I was trying to escape from the authorities. I'm like, I might be at that point where I just, cobble together an engine and have a chain, it's like make a go-kart, and that's it, an old lawnmower engine that I can hook up to some gears and make an axle move or whatever.
Buy a dirt bike or a dual sport.
Yeah, right, right, exactly.
Very handy tools to have, and they may be a life-saving tool to have in the years ahead. Yeah. I need to have several, and now I've got none because I'm a dumb. I sold mine. And I really need to get back into having one.
Oh man! Well, I want to get your thoughts, Eric. I want to bring something up on the screen here, just real quick. Herd of flocks. Okay, so I'm going to bring your volume down real quick, and I want to play this just briefly here. This is one of the flock camera situations. This is in Auburn, California. The officials, they say they're panicking after a mysterious group of people stole the majority of their flock cameras.
We're not trying to hide them. They're just there in order to help with our investigative leads.
Auburn normally has 12 in the city. Now they're down 2.
Based on our research so far, it looks like it was on April 26th.
That's when Sergeant Joe Almeida says the 2 cameras on Nevada Street and Marguerite Mine Road near Highway 49 were stolen. Officers found the poles that the cameras were mounted on empty and the cords cut. Both cameras were later found in a nearby canal.
So they're completely destroyed.
Okay, so I just want to bring this up, Eric, because on a philosophical and logical level, if we're dealing with anything that is provided by the state through taxation, how can they say that anybody who, let's say hypothetically, is a taxpayer stole anything or destroyed anything? Because obviously they help pay for it. So there's no idea that anybody can claim ownership over it. And what if they thought that form of them, which was dump them in the river, was a better form and that was an improvement? They paid for them too. How can we say that they're destroying them? It's astounding to me that the government people can find offense to say that they stole something. The flock cameras, they stole the flock cameras, and they can't think about the next question, which is, what is the source of the money that paid for the flock? Oh, that's right. It's stolen money. Like it's like a criminal complaining that he's been ripped off. It doesn't make sense.
The cognitive dissonance, I think, is probably the defining sickness of late stage terminal America. Unfortunately, there's another aspect of this too that's kind of difficult for me as as somebody who is a great respecter of property. I don't like, in principle, the idea of damaging or taking property that isn't mine.
Yeah.
But in this case, they put us in an almost impossible position. They are using money that's been extracted from us in the first place to put up these things that are then being used against us, in a really sordid and vicious and profoundly creepy way.
Yeah.
So what can we do? What alternative do we have? Most, I don't know if they're still doing it. I'm not hip to the curriculum any longer in the schools, but the Boston Tea Party was once celebrated,
Right.
when American colonists, dressed up like Indians and dumped the British tea into the harbor. Apocryphal or not, the story was, the colonists were doing this because they'd been backed into a corner, they felt, and they had to express themselves in that manner because peaceful recourse had no longer worked. There was no longer, this was an uncivilized thing that was happening. So when uncivilized things happen, you really can't answer it in a civilized way. You have to do the uncivilized thing in return. The trick is to not then become profoundly uncivilized yourself in the process.
Right. Boy, that's a perfect statement, Eric. Just perfectly stated. Well, look, I better get rolling. I hope people will go to your site, check out the store because it's awesome. And any final thoughts as we head towards the weekend or anything like that? And also, I forgot to mention, I was going to text you to say, since it's Friday, to come up with a suggestion for your favorite short story or one of your favorite short stories or a favorite movie or anything. And I don't want to put you on the spot now. If you do want to suggest anything, feel free.
Does it have to be political or philosophical?
Anything you want, at any time.
An oddball one, and I've loved this since I first encountered it in junior high school, just because of the prose. Do you know who H.H. Munro was, who went under the
Saki? Absolutely.
Remember his little short story about the cat, Tobermory?
Yeah.
Love that story. That's one of my all-time favorite short stories.
Oh, man. I wonder, it's got to be online. I'll see if I can,
It's about a talking cat.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to read that one. That would be a great one to read. And almost all his stories are fairly short. So that might be a really good one to read. That could be a really good one. I've got a collection of all of Saki's stuff. It's one of those Penguin collections. I'll see if I can find it. If I can find it online, maybe I'll read it next week. Maybe if you want to come on, we'll read it or something.
And one more, I'll throw one more at you, and this is dark. I love Edgar Allan Poe. Do you like Edgar Allan Poe?
Yeah.
Do you remember Hop Frog?
I've never read Hop Frog.
Read Hop Frog.
Yeah.
It makes the Count of Monte Cristo seem pretty tame in comparison. It's a story of revenge.
All right. That sounds good. And you just reminded me, actually, I can't say anything. I was inspired by Poe to write something, but I can't say anything because it'll spoil it. So I can't say anything. And that's the story that's going to be coming later. All right, Eric, thank you. This is awesome. I want to show your site again before we go. Go to Eric Peters Autos, everybody. And of course, follow Eric as Apostate 878.
Don't worry about it. X's point was it's a waste of time. It's a crap pot. I don't even bother interacting with anybody anymore. I've given up. There's no point.
Oh man. Well, go to Eric Peters Autos. Eric Peters Autos.
We can talk. There's no algorithm there that's going to promote people or suppress people.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point. Eric, man, you rock. I'll be playing some good stuff before the end of the night. I got a short story to read coming up tonight, and I'll talk to you a little bit off the air as well, Eric, about a little project that I've got going on. I talked to Donald Jeffries about this as well, so we'll chat about that. Okay.
Excellent. Thanks, Guard.
Live long and prosper. Watch out for Johnny Cab, brother. Eric Peters, everybody. Thank you, Eric. You rock, dude.